to Dragon Dreams. I'm Ivan, and my channel is about indie, old school, and unconventional role-playing games. Today I'm going to be reviewing a role-playing game called Into the Odd, and I put a link to it in the description below. So Into the Odd is a rules-lite, indie, and I would say OSR-adjacent role-playing game. I have not been asked to do this by them. In fact, I'm going to be telling you the good, the bad, and the ugly of this system. But it's just the sort of game that I'm interested in on this channel. It features no initiative and no to-hit rolls, just damage. And it is, well, odd. Alright, so I'm going to start by making a character. So there's just 3 ability scores: strength, dexterity, and will, or willpower. So the first step is I roll all 3 of these, 3d6 in order. Okay, let's see what I get. And for the first one, I get a 9 for strength. And for the second one, which is dexterity, I get an 11. Okay, and then for the third one, which is will, I get 13. Okay. So strength is kind of your basic stat for, I think it's a little bit like strength and constitution rolled together. I mean, it's kind of your meat on your bones plus your ability to, do feats of strength. Dexterity is kind of more like your agility, your ability to, do nimble things and so forth. And your will is kind of like an amalgam of all, kind of like int, whiz, and charisma. Strength is also kind of like your emergency backup hit points, as we'll see in a sec. Dexterity is also used to go before monsters who try to surprise you, like if they get a jump on you. And will is also used for magic items and morale. So, next step, roll hit points. I got a 6. Okay, that's cool. So, strength 9, dexterity 11, wisdom 13, hit points 6. So hit points are always just on a d6. It's a really lethal game. It's really, I've played it, and, you got to be careful in this game. Okay, so the next thing, and this is one of my favorite parts, is you consult a chart. And depending on this chart, we see my highest ability score, which is 13, and my hit points, which is 6. So let's take a look at that. So I looked up what I get on this chart. So there's this table, as you can see, where there's your highest attribute are the rows, and then there's 6 columns, 1 for each hit point, 1 through 6. So I looked up 13 and 6, and it turns out I get a long axe, rum, and a bomb. That's pretty cool. I like that. Okay, so one thing that's really neat about Into the Odd is that if your attributes are really terrible and your hit points really terrible, you get better stuff. And if they're really great, you get worse stuff. So let's look at what happens if your highest attribute is 3. You rolled straight 3s, and you rolled a 1. So you just are an abysmal character. You get a sword, a pistol, modern armor, which I happen to know is like really good. That's like plate mail in the system. And you have the ability to sense nearby unearthly beings. That's awesome. All right, let's see what happens if you get 6 hit points and an 18. You get a mace, a pigeon, and you're disfigured. You gotta love it. All right. So let's take a little bit of look at the rules. So the way combat works is, first of all, there's no initiative. The PCs always go first unless they're surprised. There's no to hit. There's just a roll for damage, and you roll like a d6 or d8, whatever your damage die is. You subtract out the armor, which is never more than 3. And that comes off of your hit points. Now, if your hit points go to 0, you're not dead. You move to the next phase in damage taking, which is that any additional hit points immediately come off of your strength. And at that point, you have to roll a strength check. And if you fail, you're incapacitated. If you succeed, you can keep fighting. And that's true of any point at which you're at 0 hit points. You have to make an additional strength check every time you take damage. If your strength goes to 0, you're dead. Okay. And so this is kind of an interesting idea. The other thing is that hit points are really kind of more like being winded or losing energy more than they are about physical damage. So the idea is that you can have a quick rest and get all of your hit points back in a single, I think, like 10-minute turn. Of course, wandering monsters could come along, or an NPC party or something, and then you'd be in trouble, or not be able to finish your rest and have to rest some other time. But what's really kind of nice about this is that hit points are almost kind of like, if you rest after each fight that you take damage, then hit points are kind of more like how much you have in a fight, and strength is sort of more like how much you have overall. So that's kind of an interesting distinction there. So next I'm going to talk about character advancement. And there's 2 ways that your character advances. One is that every time you survive an adventure, you go up a level, you get another d6 hit points. That's straightforward enough. There's not really classes in Into the Odd. It's a classless system. Remember, this is meant to be a really stripped down rules-lite game. It's also very kind of steampunk. So it's not so much like medieval fantasy. It's more like maybe Victorian fantasy. And so you have occupations, which are sort of more like secondary skills, if you remember from AD&D, but not really classes. So there's no magic system as such. There's magic items that anybody can use if they have enough will to use them. So that's the first way, is you go up a level because you finished an adventure. The second way is when your hit points go to exactly 0, bad things happen to you, but sometimes good things happen to you too. So you could get scarred, you could lose a limb. You might also go up in hit points if you recover or survive, which I think is kind of a neat idea, that it's sort of like traumatic experiences kind of make you better, make you stronger. So it's kind of an interesting thing. It kind of rewards you for taking risks and going to 0 hit points and having that experience. Okay. So in conclusion, let me review what I think of Into the Odd. I've played it twice, and it's definitely faster than any form of D&D I've ever played. It definitely cuts off the fat. The question is to cut off too much of the fat from combat? It's very fast. It has a lot of tactics to it. It can be exciting because, there's a lot of, you really don't want to take damage in this game. So you don't necessarily want to fight. You might want to sneak past opponents. And it also rewards you for doing that. Like, there's no experience points you get for killing monsters. You just get, 1 level each time you survive an adventure. And believe me, surviving is enough. However, in the final analysis, I would say I would not play this game in the future. And here's why. I think it cut off too much of the fat. The problem is that not having any form of to hit, I think, makes it just too nasty. And it's also not realistic. I mean, it doesn't make sense to me that there's no way to avoid somebody hitting you. I mean, you could dodge, you could raise a shield, you could parry. It sort of feels a little bit too much like I'm playing kind of some board game or card game, that has specific rules, and they don't have to make sense. But it's kind of like, this is sort of this weird game we came up with and figure out the tactics of how to succeed in it, rather than this is a valid simulation of this Victorian fantasy setting. So my final analysis, that's what I think. But I think there's also a lot of good things about it. I really love how it rewards you for having low hit points and low ability scores. I have some thoughts about it. Like, I would let people pick where they set their ability scores. And And I think it's a really great effort to cut the fat off. I just think they cut too much off. I hope you found this video informative. What do you think? Tell me in the comments. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing and share it with your friends. And please support me on Patreon. And until next time, keep dreaming, everybody.